now that there are instruments evidencing the pardons have become absolute, or the prerogative of mercies so granted are now irreversible. But we now further interrogate how come that the previous list even came to public light. If you look at the process for issuance of pardon under the Constitution, I cite specifically Section 175 of the 1999 Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria as amended. It involves 3 institutions: the President, the Council of State, and the Presidential Advisory Committee on Prerogative of Mercy. Now, before an announcement is made, it is expected that the Presidential Advisory Committee on Prerogative of Mercy, headed by no less a person than the Attorney General of the Federation and Minister of Justice, would have scrutinized the list, vetted the profile, the records of the individuals who are to be recommended to the President for pardon or commutation of sentence or whatever aspect of prerogative of mercy is to be exercised. Now, when the President receives the report or recommendation of the Presidential Advisory Committee, the Constitution mandates that the President will, in consultation, that is, the President will now go before the Council of State and say, oh, these are the persons that I want to exercise the power of prerogative of mercy in their favor.
All right.
What is your thinking on it? So I am making a case that while it is commendable that the President had made tinker a bit with the list, we must now ask a legitimate question about the manner in which decisions are being taken by this government. What this speaks to is that either this was done intentionally to send a message to Nigerians that as far as the issue of pardon is concerned, these are the categories of offenders that the President has interest in. Or those who have responsibility to advise the President may have either been compromised or grossly incompetent. But whatever position one decides to take, I am not satisfied that the President has not taken action regarding the membership of that committee.
All right. Just before I get to ask you my next question, let's get to remind our viewers why this presidential pardon list was really very controversial. It had the name of Miriam Sanda there, who was convicted 5 years ago, 2020, for culpable homicide of her husband, Bilyaminu Bello, and initially sentenced to death by hanging. Perhaps we can have that slide on the screen now for our viewers to see. It also has Kelvin Prosper, described as a notorious kidnap kingpin whose activities spanned multiple states. There's also Farouk Lawan, a former member of the House of Representatives, sentenced to 5 years in 2021 for bribery, collecting about $500,000 from a businessman. And then there's the convicted drug offender there, and list and all of that. So just to remind our viewers why this list perhaps was a bit controversial, this top 4 issues or persons why that list was also really sparked outrage and outburst amongst Nigerians here in the country and around the world. But you are saying that perhaps heads should roll. Give us some of those.
Yes.
Give us a sense of some of those offices or persons you think that Mr. President indeed should be questioning or relieving of their duties.
If you read the statement of Mr. Bayo Onanuga, there is a paragraph that I found rather interesting. That is the paragraph in the statement where he said that in order to avoid this kind of embarrassing episode in the future, that the President has now directed that the Secretariat of the Presidential Advisory Committee on Prerogative of Mercy should be relocated from the Ministry of Special Duties to the Ministry of Justice. Does that mean that the President has found that the Minister of Special Duties was compromised, or that the Minister of Special Duty is inefficient, it is not enough to simply make these announcements. I am saying that if truly the president is remorseful, if truly the president has now admitted that he was wrong, and is now making this concession in favor of public opinion, it is not enough to simply make certain reversals. Who made these recommendations? At whose instance were these names, the original names, put on the list? The president should be interested in addressing that. You see, because there is one point that we have to make and stress very seriously. And that is that when the president exercises the power of prerogative of mercy, he speaks eloquently to the character of the president. And I'm going to elaborate on that. If you have a president say, the person that I want to exercise this very unique power that the Constitution has vested in me in favor of, and you now choose that there are going to be persons convicted of hard drugs, engagement in trafficking of cocaine, there are going to be persons who committed grievous murder, there are going to be notorious kidnappers, there are going to be persons who stole public funds. Does that not say a lot about the thinking of the president? Does that not say a lot about the priority of the president? So this is not just about exercising power. Because in exercising that power, the Constitution demands that the president should act in the public interest. So whose interest is the president advancing? And look at the case of Maryam Sanda. We are now being told, from what we have seen, the instrument I have seen, that her sentence has now been reduced from death by hanging to 12 years imprisonment. She has already served about 6 years and 8 months. And what is the reason given? It is in the interest of the children. She has become a model for other prisoners, a change in character, and so on and so forth. But guess what? There are 1,000 Maryam Sanda across custodial centers in Nigeria. She is not the first woman who has been convicted and sentenced today for killing her husband. Why is her case special? Nigerians deserve some explanation. I concede that this is a matter of discretion. The point, however, is that in exercising this discretion, the president has to show, the president has to demonstrate to Nigerians that he's acting in good faith. This woman has only served for about 6 years and some months for taking the life of her husband, Bill Yamiyu, in a very dastardly way. Read the judgment of the court. Read what the judgment said. So I am not certain that 12 years is sufficient for the grievous crime that she committed and the manner she committed it. I am not even sure whether she is truly remorseful. But I leave that for the president. Now, in the list that has now been published, people should not assume that persons convicted of drugs are not beneficiaries. They are. Because it seems a section of the media is conveying the impression that persons convicted of drugs are completely excluded. I have looked at the list, even as I'm talking to you. I could count in total about 86 names. Some of those persons whose sentences have been reduced, they were convicted of engagement in illicit drugs. If the intention, I want to emphasize, is to decongest our custodial centers, how about persons convicted of petty offenses? Have Nigerians asked that question? How about persons who are victims of political persecution? How about persons who are convicted of stealing monies that are not significant? There are still, how about persons that were given options of fine that may even be less than $1 million? How come the president has not deemed it fit to exercise his power of prerogative of mercy in their favor? That is persons convicted of federal offenses. So I am saying that something fundamentally went wrong. And the president has a responsibility to address that. What he has done is applaudable, but it is not sufficient.
Well, thought-provoking questions that you're asking there, Mr. Effiong. And, you know, one might wonder about people who also have been awaiting trial for years and they're behind bars. I don't know whether they fall within the category of prerogative of mercy. But you raised a very critical question about the further statement in the paragraphs in the statement released by Mr. Bayo Onanuga, and which is